The year is 1901. You are a sponge diver off the coast of a small Greek island, struggling against the weight of a brass helmet, peering through the murky green dark of the Aegean Sea. Among the rotted timber of a Roman-era wreck, something catches your eye. A lump of corroded bronze, about the size of a shoebox, crusted with 2,000 years of marine growth. You bring it to the surface. It sits on the deck drying in the sun. Then it cracks open, and inside are gears, precisely machined, and interlocking bronze gears, smaller than a fingernail, fitted to tolerances that European clockmakers will not match for another 14 centuries. You have no idea what you are holding. You have no idea that it will take the greatest scientific minds of the 20th century over 100 years to understand it. And you have absolutely no idea that what you pulled off that seafloor will force the entire history of human technology to be rewritten. This is the condition of ancient mystery. Not the mystery of the undiscovered, the mystery of the fully visible, fully studied, fully documented thing that still refuses to give up its answer. 10 of those mysteries follow. 10 questions that the best scientists, archaeologists, engineers, and historians of the modern world have looked at directly, with every tool available, and have not been able to answer. 1. The computer out of time. The Antikythera Mechanism unsolved. You are on the deck of a recovery vessel in 1901, and the corroded bronze lump drying in the sun has just changed everything. Inside it, revealed as the casing splits, are 30 interlocking bronze gears machined to sub-millimeter tolerances. This is not a decorative object. This is not a simple instrument. This is a functioning analog computer, and it was built somewhere between 260 BCE, 2,000 years before the Industrial Revolution produced anything remotely comparable. The Antikythera Mechanism is now housed in the National Archaeological Museum in Athens. Modern analysis using X-ray computed tomography has revealed an instrument of extraordinary complexity. The 37 gears it contains calculate the positions of the sun and moon, predict solar and lunar eclipses on the 18-year Saros cycle, track the 4-year cycle of the ancient Olympic Games, and model the elliptical anomaly of the lunar orbit using a pin and slot epicyclic gear system of genuine mechanical ingenuity. A 2021 reconstruction by University College London proposed a complete working model of the front mechanism, incorporating planetary motions for all 5 planets known to the ancient Greeks. The device was, in the fullest sense, a pocket universe, a working model of the sky that fit in a wooden box. Now, but the mainstream explanation is that it represents the pinnacle of a Hellenistic tradition of mechanical engineering described in ancient texts, most of which have been lost. Ancient writers, including Cicero, describe devices capable of reproducing celestial motions. The Antikythera Mechanism in this reading is simply the sole surviving example of a sophisticated engineering tradition that was more common in its time than it appears to us now, because everything else was destroyed or lost in the chaos of the post-Roman centuries. The problem with this explanation is the silence of the archaeological record. If devices of this complexity were a known feature of Hellenistic technology, they should appear somewhere in the material record, in fragments, in simpler predecessors, in the workshops of Roman metalworkers who inherited Greek engineering traditions. Now, in over 2,000 years of archaeological excavation across the entire former territory of the Greek and Roman worlds, no comparable mechanism, no fragment identifiable as part of a related device, has ever been found. The Antikythera Mechanism stands completely alone. One device, one shipwreck, nothing before it and nothing after it for 14 centuries. And the gear teeth are cut to a precision that experimental replication teams using period-accurate tools have found extremely difficult to match. The eclipse prediction capability requires an understanding of the geometry of the lunar orbit refined enough to distinguish which eclipses would be visible from which locations. The pin and slot mechanism that models the lunar anomaly is a solution to a genuine mathematical problem: the non-uniform speed of the moon across its orbit. That is mechanically elegant in a way that implies not just knowledge of the anomaly, but sustained engineering effort to solve it in hardware. Who built it and in what workshop? Where is every other example of comparable Hellenistic clockwork that should exist if this was an established tradition? Why does the single surviving specimen represent a level of mechanical sophistication that vanishes entirely from the historical record for 14 centuries? And what else was on that shipwreck, still on the seabed, that we have not yet recovered? 2. The code that broke every codebreaker. The Voynich Manuscript, Unsolved. You are Wilfred Voynich, a Polish book dealer, and it is 1912, and you have just purchased a manuscript from the Jesuit college at the Villa Mondragone in Italy that is going to absorb the attention of every cryptographer, linguist, historian, and computational analyst who encounters it for the next 112 years, and none of them are going to be able to tell you what it says. The manuscript is 240 pages of vellum. The ink is genuine. The parchment has been carbon dated to between 1404 and 1438 CE. It is illustrated throughout with drawings of plants that cannot be identified, astronomical diagrams of stars that do not correspond to any known constellation map, and figures of women bathing in interconnected pools of green liquid whose purpose has not been explained. Every page of text is written in a flowing, confident script that reads left to right, grouped in what appear to be words and paragraphs, following statistical patterns consistent with a natural human language, and it has never been decoded. Not by the code breakers who cracked the Nazi Enigma cipher during World War II, not by NSA analysts who studied it during the Cold War, not by a century of professional cryptographers, not by machine learning systems trained on every known cipher and language in the world. The Voynich Manuscript is held at the Beinecke Rare Book and Manuscript Library at Yale University, and it contains approximately 170,000 characters, forming roughly 35,000 words in an unknown script. Statistical analysis of the text shows properties consistent with natural language, a Zipfian distribution of word frequencies, consistent word length patterns, and apparent grammatical structure, including what appear to be prefixes, suffixes, and roots behaving as they would in a real linguistic system. It is not random, and it is not a simple substitution cipher of any known language. Whatever it is, it was produced with systematic intention by someone who knew exactly what they were doing. The mainstream scholarly position is agnostic, divided between three principal hypotheses. It is an elaborate hoax, producing language-like text that contains no meaning. It is an enciphered natural language using an unknown or lost cipher system. Or it is a constructed philosophical or medical notation system in a private code rather than a public language. A 2019 paper claimed it was written in a lost Romance language called Proto-Italic. But the proposed translation was rejected by the majority of reviewing linguists as failing to produce coherent meaning. A 2022 artificial intelligence analysis identified statistical similarities to Arabic and Hebrew, but could not produce a translation. The hoax hypothesis has a specific problem that computational analysis has sharpened considerably, producing 240 pages of text that successfully passes every statistical test for natural language while containing no actual meaning is an extraordinarily difficult cognitive task. Modern attempts to generate language-like nonsense that simultaneously satisfies all of the statistical properties the Voynich text satisfies have found it surprisingly hard to do consistently. And the cognitive effort required to sustain a meaningful seeming but meaningless text across 240 pages for an audience that apparently never existed would have been enormous for a 15th century author working by hand on expensive vellum. The plant illustrations deepen the problem. The manuscript contains approximately 113 illustrations of plants, none of which have been definitively identified with any known species. And they are detailed enough to suggest observation or source images of real plants rather than pure invention. But they do not match any plant in the European, Middle Eastern, or Asian botanical traditions of the period. Either they are entirely imaginary, or they depict plants from a source that has not been identified. What language, cipher, or notation does the Voynich manuscript encode? Who created it? For what purpose? And for what audience? Why do 113 plant illustrations resist identification despite sufficient botanical detail to suggest observational drawing? And how has a 240-page manuscript resisted decipherment by every tool available to human intelligence across 112 years of sustained effort by some of the finest analytical minds in history? 3. The jar with a current. The Baghdad Battery Unsolved. You are an archaeologist at Kujut Rabu outside Baghdad in 1936. And you are holding a clay jar about the size of a large fist. Inside the jar is a copper cylinder. Inside the copper cylinder is an iron rod, isolated from the copper by an asphalt stopper. The jar dates to somewhere between 250 BCE and 640 CE, placing it in the Parthian or Sassanid period. You set it down and move on, cataloging it as a storage vessel. It takes another archaeologist, Wilhelm König, director of the Baghdad Museum, to look at it differently. He fills one with an acidic liquid, vinegar, connects wires to the copper and iron terminals, and measures a voltage of approximately 1.1 volts. The clay jar is a battery. It has been a battery for 2,000 years, and nobody can fully explain why it was built. The Baghdad Battery, more precisely, a group of similar vessels found at the same site, is now partially housed in the Baghdad Museum. The basic electrochemical principle is not disputed. The configuration of copper cylinder, an iron rod, and acidic electrolyte produces a measurable galvanic current by the same principle that Alessandro Volta described in 1800, nearly 2,000 years after these jars were made. Multiple independent replications have confirmed that the design works as a battery. The scientific question is not whether it produces electricity. The scientific question is whether that was intentional, and if so, what it was used for. The mainstream explanation most frequently proposed is electroplating, using electrical current to deposit a thin layer of precious metal onto a base metal object, producing gold or silver-plated jewelry at lower cost than solid casting. It is a technically plausible application that would explain why. Someone would want a low-voltage current source in an ancient workshop. The problem is the evidence. Electroplated artifacts from the Parthian or Sassanid periods have not been found. Gold and silver objects from this era that have been analyzed show no electrochemical deposition layer, distinguishable from conventional gilding techniques. The application the mainstream explanation proposes leaves no surviving trace in the archaeological record of the civilization that supposedly used it. The deeper problem is intentionality. The specific configuration of materials, copper, iron, asphalt seal, acidic contents, is not the obvious result of accidental combination. Copper vessels sealed with asphalt stoppers containing iron rods are not a natural artifact of food storage or religious practice. The design looks purposeful in a way that requires either electrochemical knowledge or an extraordinary coincidence of unrelated practical choices that happen to produce a battery. There is no middle ground between those two options that the evidence clearly supports. What were the Baghdad batteries actually used for? Why has no electroplated artifact from the period been found if plating was the application? How did craftsmen in the Parthian period arrive at a configuration that independently replicates the core design of the voltaic pile 2 millennia before Volta? And why does the object appear in the archaeological record without precedent, without development, and without any documented successor technology? 4. The stone that shouldn't move. The Great Pyramid in Unsolved. You're a structural engineer in 2024 and you have a problem. You need to move 2.3 million stone blocks, weighing between 2.5 and 80 tons each, across open desert, up a rising structure, and place them with tolerances tight enough that a sheet of paper cannot be inserted between the joints. You have unlimited funding, modern cranes, GPS surveying equipment, laser levels, and a workforce unconstrained by the logistical limits of the ancient world. You have 20 years. Most structural engineers who have seriously studied this question will tell you the same thing quietly, away from cameras. They are not certain they could do it. And someone did it 4,500 years ago, in 20 years, with copper tools, wooden sledges, and rope. The Great Pyramid of Giza was built for the pharaoh Khufu around 2560 BCE. It stood 481 feet tall and remained the tallest structure on Earth for 3,800 years. Its base covers 13 acres. The four sides are oriented to true north, south, east, and west, with an accuracy of 0.05 degrees, a precision that exceeds most modern buildings. The corner angles deviate from a perfect square by less than 1 inch across a base, measuring 756 feet per side. And the base is leveled to within 2.1 centimeters across its entire 13-acre footprint. The internal chambers are aligned to specific stellar positions. The roughly 2.3 million blocks were quarried, transported, and placed at a rate, assuming 20 years of continuous construction, of 1 block every 2 minutes, 24 hours a day, for 2 decades. The mainstream explanation involves massive organized labor, copper and stone tools, wooden sledges on wetted ramps, and a logistics system sophisticated enough to feed and house a workforce estimated between 20,000 and 36,000 people permanently on site. A 2018 discovery at Wadi al-Jarf on the Red Sea coast found the oldest known papyri, written by an overseer named Mirir, documenting the daily transport of limestone blocks to Giza by boat and sledge. The Mirir papyri are genuine and significant. They confirm large-scale administrative organization and establish the logistics of moving casing limestone from the Tura quarries across the Nile. What the Mirir papyri do not document is the interior. The granite beams of the king's chamber weigh up to 80 tons each. Their stone came from Aswan, 500 miles to the south. They are installed inside a chamber that required them to be moved through passages barely large enough to accommodate them, and raised to a height of 175 feet inside the structure and placed with sub-centimeter accuracy. Experimental teams have moved large limestone blocks on wetted surfaces with organized human labor. Nobody has demonstrated moving an 80-ton granite beam up a rising internal structure through narrow passages and placing it to the tolerances the king's chamber achieves, using only tools available in 2560 BCE. The precision of the base is the element that most resists explanation. Leveling a 13-acre area to within 2.1 centimeters across its full extent requires surveying methodology capable of maintaining a consistent datum across a distance of 756 feet through the heat distortion and ground variation of an Egyptian construction site. The tools available to Egyptian builders, plumb bobs, set squares, stretched cords, can be used to achieve local precision. In how they maintain that precision at continental scale without optical surveying equipment has not been demonstrated by any experimental archaeology program. How were the 80-ton granite beams of the king's chamber moved through passages that barely accommodate them? How was a 13-acre base leveled to within 2.1 centimeters without modern surveying equipment? And why does the structure encode precise mathematical relationships, including a close approximation of pi in the ratio of its perimeter to its height, that surviving Egyptian mathematical papyri do not formally describe? And why, after a century of experimental archaeology, attempting to replicate even small sections of the construction, has no team achieved the tolerances the original achieves? 5. The surgery before science. Trepanation in the ancient world. Unsolved. You are a surgeon in 2024, and you are about to perform a craniotomy. You have general anesthesia, sterile instruments, a full surgical team, post-operative antibiotics, and an intensive care unit standing by. Your patient's survival rate is above 95%. Now remove everything except the intention. No anesthesia, no sterility, no antibiotics, no imaging, no understanding of germ theory. You are going to open a living human skull with a stone tool in 6500 BCE, and your patient is going to survive, heal completely, and live for decades afterward. We know this because we have the skull, and the bone shows full regrowth around the opening. Trepanation, the deliberate cutting or scraping of a hole in the living human skull, is the oldest known surgical procedure in human history. Evidence of it has been found on every inhabited continent except Antarctica, spanning from at least 6500 BCE in Neolithic Europe to pre-Columbian Peru to Bronze Age China. At the Neolithic site of Ensisheim in France, a skull was found with 2 trepanation holes, both showing complete bone regrowth, meaning the patient survived both procedures, years apart. At the Peruvian site of Paracas, over 400 trepanned skulls have been recovered, and with survival rates estimated by bone regrowth analysis at between 40 and 80%. Survival rates comparable to those of 19th century European surgery, performed with full modern anatomical knowledge and steel instruments. The mainstream explanation is pragmatic. Ancient people suffered head injuries from warfare, falls, and accidents. Skull fractures with bone fragments pressing on the brain cause seizures, loss of consciousness, and death. And removing the fragments or relieving the pressure is a logical intervention that careful observation could produce through trial and error over generations. The procedure, once discovered, spread through cultural contact. Different civilizations developed different techniques: scraping, drilling, cutting, grooving, all arriving at the same functional result. The logic is reasonable. The survival rate trajectory is what breaks it. In a comprehensive 2018 analysis published in World Neurosurgery, found that pre-Columbian Peruvian trepanation survival rates rose from roughly 40% in the earliest period to nearly 80% in the period immediately preceding Spanish contact. That trajectory implies systematic learning, the accumulation and transmission of surgical knowledge across generations in a culture with no writing system capable of recording medical texts. Someone was teaching someone else, over centuries, how to open a skull without killing the patient. And they were getting measurably better at it. The anesthesia problem is what modern medicine cannot resolve from the available evidence. A conscious patient undergoing skull surgery with a stone tool would move. Movement during a craniotomy is catastrophic. The plants available in ancient Peru, coca leaves, chicha, various psychoactive compounds, could produce sedation, but producing the complete patient immobility required for precision bone work in a skull, without an overdose that would kill the patient, requires pharmaceutical control that the available compounds should not have provided. Yet the precision is documented in the healed bone. Someone solved the anesthesia problem. We do not know how they solved it. What anesthetic technique made precision skull surgery survivable without modern compounds? How was an improving surgical knowledge base transmitted reliably across generations in a non-literate culture? Why did trepanation emerge independently on every inhabited continent? And what does that universality tell us about the independent development of this specific solution? And what were ancient surgeons treating in the documented cases where trepanation was performed on patients who showed no traumatic skull injury? 6. The city before cities. Gobekli Tepe, Unsolved. You are archaeologist Klaus Schmidt, and it is 1994, and you are standing on a hilltop in southeastern Turkey looking at something that is going to force your entire field to rewrite its foundational assumptions. Emerging from the soil around you are massive T-shaped limestone pillars, arranged in circular enclosures carved with reliefs of foxes, snakes, boars, cranes, and spiders executed with artistic confidence and technical skill. The largest pillars stand 18 feet tall and weigh 20 tons. They were carved, transported, and erected by people who, according to every developmental model archaeology had constructed over the preceding century, should not have been capable of building anything of this scale or sophistication. They were hunter-gatherers. No agriculture, no pottery, no domesticated animals, no permanent settlements, no writing. They were not supposed to be able to build a monumental ceremonial complex. And they built one anyway, 11,500 years ago. And then they deliberately buried it. Gobekli Tepe is the oldest known monumental structure on Earth by a margin of approximately 6,000 years. Constructed around 9,600 BCE, it predates Stonehenge by 6,600 years and the Great Pyramid by 7,000 years. It consists of at least 20 circular enclosures, of which only a fraction have been excavated, in each containing T-shaped pillars decorated with carved animal reliefs of sophisticated artistic quality. The site shows evidence of repeated construction, use, and deliberate burial over approximately 2,000 years, after which it was sealed under hundreds of tons of fill material and abandoned around 8,000 BCE. But the mainstream explanation is that Gobekli Tepe was a ritual or ceremonial gathering site that preceded and perhaps catalyzed the development of agriculture rather than following from it, as archaeology had always assumed. The construction and maintenance of the site required organized cooperative labor that may have necessitated food surplus production to feed large seasonal gatherings, providing a motivation for the development of farming. In this reading, the need to gather for religious ritual built civilization, not the other way around. The deliberate burial is interpreted as ritual decommissioning when the site's religious function was transferred or transformed. The reversal of the assumed sequence is itself a foundational challenge to the standard model of human development, but the construction logistics remain the deeper problem. The 20-ton pillars were quarried from bedrock at a site 500 meters from the complex, by using only stone tools by people with no wheeled vehicles and no domesticated animals capable of hauling multi-ton loads. Organized teams of humans can move large stones with wooden levers and ropes. What experimental archaeology has not demonstrated is how a hunter-gatherer population maintained the organizational stability, the food surplus to sustain non-hunting laborers, and the institutional continuity across multiple generations required to build a multi-enclosure complex over 2,000 years without any of the infrastructure, settled agriculture, permanent administration, written records, that every prior model assumed was necessary for projects of this scale. The deliberate burial is equally unresolved. Around 8,000 BCE, the entire complex was filled with hundreds of tons of stone rubble and animal bones, permanently sealing the enclosures. While this act of burial required as much organized labor as the original construction, whoever sealed Gobekli Tepe wanted it gone from the surface of the world, and they wanted it gone thoroughly. We do not know why. Why did hunter-gatherers build a monumental complex that required agricultural-level organization before agriculture existed? And what does the 2,000-year institutional continuity of a single ritual site tell us about the cognitive and social complexity of human beings 11,000 years ago? What is beneath the unexcavated 95% of the site? And why was the entire complex deliberately buried rather than simply abandoned? 7. The darkness underground. The Longyou Caves Unsolved. You are a villager in Zhejiang Province, China, in 1992, and you have decided to pump out a pond that the local community has always assumed was bottomless. The pump runs for 17 days. When the water level finally drops, what is revealed is not a pond bottom. It is the entrance to a vast artificial cavern. its walls and ceiling covered in uniform parallel chisel marks, cut from solid siltstone with a precision and regularity that looks less like ancient construction and more like modern machining. You find 23 more, and the caves collectively cover an area of approximately 30,000 square meters. Some individual chambers are 30 meters high. The total volume of rock removed to create them runs into the millions of tons. There is no record of their construction in any Chinese imperial archive. There is no soot on the ceilings from oil lamps or torches. There are no tools left behind. There is no debris from the excavation. There is, in every material sense, no evidence that the construction ever happened, only the caves themselves, enormous and perfect, waiting under the water. The Longyou caves are located near the town of Xianbeikun in Zhejiang province and are believed to date to a period before the Qin dynasty, placing their construction at roughly 2,000 years ago or earlier. Archaeological analysis confirms they are man-made. The parallel chisel marks covering the walls and ceilings follow consistent patterns that repeat across all 24 caves, suggesting a standardized construction methodology applied by an organized workforce. The caves show no structural failures or collapses, despite their age and the pressure of the rock above them, indicating sophisticated understanding of load distribution in the siltstone. The mainstream explanation is that the caves were quarried for building stone, a common practice in ancient China, and that the absence of records reflects gaps in the surviving historical archive rather than a genuine absence of documentation. Large quarrying operations in ancient China were not always recorded at the imperial level. The parallel chisel marks reflect the systematic technique of organized quarry workers. The absence of soot is explained by the possibility that the caves were well ventilated and that the organic residues of ancient lamps have degraded over 2 millennia. The scale challenges the quarry explanation directly. The 24 caves together represent one of the largest underground construction projects in the ancient world. Chinese imperial records are among the most comprehensive surviving administrative archives from antiquity. Infrastructure projects requiring the removal of millions of tons of rock and the labor of thousands of workers over extended periods consistently appear in these records. The complete absence of any reference to the Longyou caves across the entire Chinese historical archive, not a gap, but a total silence, is not satisfactorily explained by record degradation alone. The absence of soot is the detail that most resists the conventional explanation. Carving 30 meters of vertical cave into solid siltstone requires sustained illumination. Every other ancient underground construction site of comparable scale, Egyptian tombs, Roman catacombs, pre-Columbian cave systems, shows evidence of lamp use in the form of carbon deposits on ceilings and walls. The Longyou caves show none. If millions of tons of rock were removed by lamplight over years of work, the ceilings should be black. They are not. And how were the Longyou caves illuminated during construction without leaving soot deposits? How was a construction project of this scale, one of the largest underground excavations in the ancient world, conducted without appearing in any Chinese imperial record? What was the purpose of 24 interconnected artificial caves of this size? And who decided that what had been done should leave no trace of having been done? 8. The metal that knew too much. The Delhi iron pillar. Unsolved. You are standing in the Qutb complex in Delhi, and it is any year you choose between the 5th century CE and today, because the object in front of you looks the same in all of them. The Iron Pillar of Delhi is 7 meters tall, weighs over 6 tons, and has stood in the open air of northern India, a climate of monsoon humidity, temperature extremes, and atmospheric conditions that destroy unprotected iron within decades. For approximately 1,600 years, it should be a pile of rust. It is not. The surface carries a thin patina, the normal weathering of very old metal. But beneath that patina, the iron is structurally sound, uncorroded, and in a state of preservation that no iron object of comparable age and exposure has achieved anywhere else in the world. The pillar was erected during the reign of Chandragupta II, who ruled the Gupta Empire from approximately 375 to 415 CE. It is inscribed in Sanskrit with a dedication to the god Vishnu. A metallurgical analysis conducted in the 20th century established the mechanism of its preservation. The iron used in its construction has an unusually high phosphorus content, between 0.10 and 0.28%, far above the threshold found in modern steelmaking. This high phosphorus content, combined with the specific slag inclusions left by the ancient wrought iron process, it creates conditions under which a thin protective film of iron hydrogen phosphate forms on the surface of the metal when exposed to humidity. This passive film acts as a barrier between the iron and the corrosive atmosphere, preventing the oxidation chain that produces rust. Once established, the film is self-maintaining. The pillar, in effect, protects itself. Modern materials science can describe this mechanism in full. The chemistry is well understood. The phosphorus content, the slag microstructure, the film composition, all of it has been characterized and published. We can explain exactly how the pillar does not rust. What we cannot explain is how the craftsman who made it knew to make it this way. The high phosphorus content is not accidental. Achieving it consistently requires either deliberate selection of high phosphorus iron ore or a smelting process specifically designed to retain phosphorus in the final product. Modern iron and steel making deliberately minimizes phosphorus content because phosphorus makes iron brittle under most conditions. The ancient Indian smiths who made the Delhi pillar were not following a recipe they found written down. They were working from a tradition of practical metallurgical knowledge that had, through processes of empirical refinement we cannot reconstruct, and arrived at a formulation that produces a self-protecting iron, a result that modern chemistry understands, but that 4th century metallurgy had no theoretical framework for and no reason to pursue unless the empirical tradition had demonstrated its value over generations. We can explain how the pillar does not rust. We cannot explain how they knew the chemistry to prevent it. That gap between our ability to characterize the result and our inability to explain the knowledge that produced it is precisely the form that the deepest ancient mysteries take. The answer is in front of you. You still cannot read it. What tradition of empirical metallurgical knowledge produced a corrosion-resistant iron formulation in the 4th century CE without any theoretical chemistry framework? Now, why did this knowledge not spread beyond the specific tradition that created the Delhi pillar? What other ancient metallurgical formulations have been lost that represented equivalent sophistication in different applications? And why has modern industrial metallurgy, with complete chemical understanding of the mechanism, not produced a structural iron using the same principle for large-scale construction? 9. The object without a purpose. Roman dodecahedrons. Unsolved. You are an archaeologist excavating a Roman site in the Rhine Valley, and you have just found something that is going to join a list of over 100 identical objects found across a geographic range stretching from Britain to Hungary. And despite that number, despite the full resources of classical scholarship, despite the fact that Rome was the most thoroughly documented civilization in the ancient world, you are not going to be able to tell anyone what it is. That the Roman dodecahedron is a small hollow bronze object with 12 flat pentagonal faces, each face pierced by a circular hole of a different diameter. Knobs project from each of the 20 corners. They range in size from about 4 centimeters to 11 centimeters across. They have been found at over 100 sites across the Northern Roman Empire, Roman Britain, Gaul, the Rhine, and Danube frontier provinces, and into the Balkans. They date from the 2nd to 4th century CE, and they appear nowhere in Roman literature, nowhere in Roman art, nowhere in the extensive surviving records of Roman military administration, trade, or religious practice. The most thoroughly documented civilization in the ancient world kept no written record of an object that appears in the archaeological record of its northern provinces more than 100 times. The mainstream position is openly agnostic. Proposed functions include measuring instruments for determining optimal planting dates based on solar angles, range-finding devices for artillery, gauges for calibrating standard pipe or candle widths, knitting tools for making gloves, children's toys, religious cult objects, and dice. None of these explanations has achieved consensus because none of them fully accounts for all the object's features simultaneously. The varying hole diameters suggest a measuring or gauging function. The hollow interior and knobs suggest something else. No two researchers examining the complete set of features have arrived at the same conclusion. The silence of the Roman record is the deepest anomaly. Rome documented everything. Military equipment was cataloged and standardized. Religious objects were described in temple inventories. Trade goods appeared in customs records. Craft tools were depicted in workshop mosaics. A bronze object manufactured to a consistent and complex geometric design, produced in sufficient quantity to appear across the full breadth of the Northern Empire over 2 centuries, should appear somewhere in the surviving written record. It does not appear anywhere. One pattern in the distribution is noted but unexplained. The dodecahedrons cluster in the northern provinces, Britain, Gaul, the Rhine frontier, and are largely absent from the Mediterranean heartland of the empire. This suggests either a function specific to northern climates or latitudes, or an origin in the pre-Roman cultures of northwestern Europe rather than in Rome itself, subsequently absorbed into Roman material culture without ever being named in Roman writing. What were Roman dodecahedrons used for? Why do they appear nowhere in the extensive, surviving written record of Roman civilization despite over 100 recovered examples? And what does the northern distribution pattern tell us about their origin or function? And why has no experimental use test of any of the proposed functions produced results convincing enough to close the question? 10. The signal that came once. The WOW signal unsolved. You are astronomer Jerry Amon, and it is August 15th, 1977, and you are sitting at a desk at the Big Ear Radio Observatory in Delaware, Ohio, reviewing a computer printout of radio telescope data. The telescope has been scanning the sky as part of the SETI program, the search for extraterrestrial intelligence, listening for radio signals that might indicate the existence of other technological civilizations. You are looking at columns of alphanumeric characters representing signal intensity on a scale of 1 to 35. The routine data scrolls past, and then you see it. A vertical column reading 6 EQUJ5, and a signal that rose and fell over 72 seconds, with a profile perfectly consistent with a narrowband radio transmission from a fixed point source in deep space. A signal at precisely 1,420 megahertz, the hydrogen line frequency, the frequency that every physicist on Earth agrees would be the logical choice for interstellar communication, because hydrogen is the most abundant element in the universe, and any technological civilization would know it. You circle the column with a red pen and write one word in the margin: WOW. The WOW signal remains the strongest candidate for extraterrestrial contact in the 47-year history of SETI research. It arrived from the direction of the constellation Sagittarius. It lasted exactly 72 seconds, the maximum duration the Big Ear telescope could observe any fixed point in the sky given Earth's rotation. And its signal strength was approximately 30 times the background noise level of deep space, an enormous intensity for a narrowband signal. It arrived at precisely the frequency that human physicists had predicted, before receiving it, would be the most logical channel for interstellar communication. It has never been detected again. The mainstream scientific explanation is terrestrial radio interference, a satellite, aircraft, or ground-based transmitter, reflected or refracted into the telescope's detection field. Alternatively, it may have been a natural astrophysical phenomenon, producing a brief, intense, narrowband radio burst from a stellar event not fully catalogued in 1977. The terrestrial interference explanation has a structural problem. The Big Ear telescope used 2 feed horns to detect signals. Any terrestrial source strong enough to produce the wow, a signal's intensity would have triggered both horns sequentially as Earth rotated. The wow signal appeared in one horn only and was never detected in the second. This is precisely the behavior expected from a fixed point source in deep space. It is precisely not the behavior expected from a terrestrial transmitter. In 2016, astronomer Antonio Perei proposed that the signal was produced by hydrogen clouds surrounding a passing comet, specifically comets 266P/Christensen and P/2008Y2, and which were in the relevant region of sky in 1977 but had not yet been catalogued. The hypothesis was testable. When the comets made return passes in 2017 and were observed with dedicated radio telescopes at the predicted frequencies, the signal was not reproduced. The comet hypothesis was not confirmed. No verified natural explanation has been identified in 47 years. No repeat detection has been made despite follow-up observations with telescopes more sensitive than Big Ear. And the signal arrived once, matched every predicted characteristic of an intentional transmission from deep space, and did not return. It sits in an archive in Ohio, circled in red pen, waiting. Why has the strongest SETI candidate in 47 years of searching never repeated? Why did it appear in only one of 2 detection horns, ruling out the most common class of terrestrial interference? And but what natural astrophysical mechanism produces Anomalies, a 72-second narrowband signal at precisely the hydrogen line frequency, the frequency predicted for interstellar communication? That has not been reproduced in subsequent observations? And what would it actually take scientifically and institutionally to either confirm or definitively rule out the extraterrestrial hypothesis for a signal we only ever received once? The Pattern 10 Mysteries. 10 questions that have been studied with the full force of modern science and have not been answered. A mechanical computer from antiquity that stands completely alone in the archaeological record for 14 centuries before and after it. A manuscript written in apparent language that 112 years of cryptographic effort has not decoded. A clay jar that produces electrical current 2,000 years before the battery was invented, with no surviving trace of what it powered. A pyramid built to tolerances that challenge modern engineering by methods that experimental archaeology cannot fully replicate. Surgeons opening skulls in 6,500 BCE and achieving survival rates that matched 19th century medicine. A ceremonial complex built by hunter-gatherers 11,000 years ago that required agricultural-level organization before agriculture existed, then deliberately buried. An underground city of 24 vast caves carved without leaving soot, tools, or records. An iron pillar whose anti-corrosion chemistry we can now fully describe, but whose makers had no theoretical framework for understanding. A bronze object found 100 times across a continent that appears nowhere in the written record of the civilization that made it. And a radio signal that arrived once, matched every predicted characteristic of an intentional extraterrestrial transmission, and has not returned in 47 years. What connects them is not the supernatural, and it is the specific gap between what we can observe and what we can explain. Every one of these mysteries is made of real, physical, measurable, datable evidence. The Antikythera Mechanism is in a museum in Athens. The Voynich Manuscript is at Yale. The WOW signal is on a printout in an Ohio archive, still circled in red pen. The Delhi pillar is standing in the open air right now, not rusting. The longyou caves are open to visitors. These are not legends. They are objects and signals you can point to, touch, scan, date, and analyze. And they still don't give up their answers. That is the specific discomfort of ancient mystery at its deepest. It is not the mystery of the undiscovered. It is the mystery of the fully visible thing that looks back at you with complete indifference to your questions. The pyramid has been there for 4,500 years. The Voynich manuscript has been at Yale since 1969. The wow and signal has been in that printout since 1977. The answers, if they exist, are somewhere in the evidence we already have. We just haven't found the question that unlocks them yet.